Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. Let's dive into a story of contract clauses, overworked employees, and a masterclass in following the rules to the letter. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. Strictly work from office. This story takes place almost 10 years ago when I was working as a Java developer for a telecom service provider. After spending 5 years at my first job, I was ready for a change. My first company had an excellent work-from-home policy, and I was looking for a new opportunity with a similar setup. However, this was in 2014-2015, well before the COVID-19 pandemic made remote work mainstream, so finding a good WFH policy was tough. I came across several opportunities, but none of them offered work-from-home flexibility, which had become a key factor in my job satisfaction. After some time, I decided to set that requirement aside and focus more on other aspects of the job. I eventually found a company with a very generous salary offer, almost double what I was earning at the time. However, when I asked HR about the work-from-home policy, I got a very strict answer. It was strictly work from office. I wasn't happy with this, but the pay was tempting, so I tried to look on the bright side. I even asked HR to include the strictly work from office clause in my contract, thinking it would be my one and only chance to negotiate. After joining the company, I was inducted into my project team, only to find out the team was severely understaffed. They were missing at least 4 people, and as a result, everyone was overworked. People were regularly working 60 to 70-hour weeks with no overtime pay or any kind of bonus or promotion for their efforts. I was the only one with my specific expertise, and I'd been brought in to replace someone who was about to leave. During the second week, there was a meeting where the domain lead congratulated the team for their latest success, praising the profits we had made for the company, and even mentioning a pizza party to celebrate. That's when I realized how toxic the work culture was. People were being pushed to overwork without any compensation or recognition. To deal with the excessive hours, I decided to take my laptop to the office and store it in a locker at the end of the day. For the first 3 weeks, I was training and receiving knowledge transfer, so there were no issues with this. But once my training was complete and the person who was training me left, I received my first big project. The workload was massive, easily 80 hours of work, but I was given only 6 days to complete it. I worked diligently for the 6 days, but by the end of the week, I was only about 60% done. I explained to my manager that I needed an additional 4 days to finish the work properly. His response was simple: work at home. That's why you have a laptop you can take home. This was my cue for some malicious compliance. I politely reminded him that my contract specifically stated I was prohibited from working from home. He didn't take it well, and the next day a meeting was scheduled with HR to review my contract. When the meeting took place, my contract was clear: working from office only, working from home not permitted. I explained that I tried to negotiate for work from home when I first joined, but was firmly denied. Both my manager and HR were dumbfounded. They couldn't believe I was actually following my contract to the letter. It was clear they hadn't read the consequences of their own policies. For the next 8 months, I worked at my normal pace, adhering to my contract and refusing to take work home. As the end of the year approached, we had our salary reviews. In the meeting, I was offered the opportunity to work from home, but there was a catch. They refused to include an overtime clause that would pay me extra for any hours worked beyond 8 hours a day. I countered with the request to have that clause added, but they disagreed. I then declined the work from home offer. Interestingly, every other teammate also refused the work from home offer and demanded an overtime clause in their contracts. After that, the company stopped offering pizza parties as incentives, and the work culture became even more strained. In the end, I got the last laugh. I followed the contract, stuck to my guns, and forced the company to recognize the issues in their policies. The once high hopes for working from home were dashed, and instead I walked away with the satisfaction of having made my point, even though the company wasn't willing to change. Oh, this is gold. Pure, unfiltered corporate pettiness gold. You basically Uno reversed their strictly work from office nonsense into a no overtime, no bending over policy, and I love it. They set themselves up so perfectly for this downfall that it's almost poetic. Honestly, this is the kind of story I want framed in an office break room as a reminder to companies everywhere: Don't write ridiculous clauses into contracts unless you're ready to choke on them. Bravo! And our second story. Customers clap back when a manager's ego met reality. I work in asset financing, primarily for motor vehicles and land. Essentially, if someone wants a piece of land or a car but doesn't have the full amount to pay for it up front, we buy the asset for them. They then repay us in installments with interest, and once they've cleared the loan, we give them the deed to the property. That's the basic setup. I was working in a customer service role at the company when a client came in requesting the deed for his car, or in our terms, the logbook. He had fully cleared his loan and was eager to get the document to prove ownership. I checked the system, and unfortunately, his deed wasn't ready yet. I had to tell him it would be a couple of weeks before he could get it. The client, understandably, wasn't happy with that. He needed proof of ownership urgently and wanted the document right then and there. I totally understood his frustration, but there wasn't much I could do at that moment except escalate the issue to the manager of the department responsible for these matters, hoping they could sort it out quickly. I went to the manager's office and gave him the rundown of the situation. His response, he called me incompetent and lazy, saying I had a habit of escalating cases unnecessarily. This came from someone who spends his workday avoiding calls, wasting time on YouTube and TikTok, and gets angry if you approach his desk with work-related issues. He told me to go grab the client and watch how easily he could handle it. I thought to myself, okay, let's see this. I brought the client to his office and things went south quickly. As soon as the manager tried the usual excuse about government delays and the client needing to be patient, the client lost it. He started shouting at the manager, and before anyone could react, he slapped the manager and sent the contents of his desk flying across the room. Other staff heard the commotion and security escorted the client out. The best part? After everything settled, the manager shot me a look. One of those "you were right, I was wrong" looks. From that day on, he's handled my escalations much quicker and more effectively. Whenever I think back on that moment, I can't help but smile. It's one of those stories that, in the end, feels like justice served in the most unexpected way. Your manager clearly underestimated both the urgency of the situation and the frustration of a client who's just trying to get what's rightfully theirs. That smug watch and learn attitude? Oh, it aged like milk. You know what's wild? The slap wasn't just literal, it was symbolic, a wake-up for your manager's incompetence. Sure, violence isn't the answer, but in this case, it sure served as an exclamation point on what you've probably been telling him all along. Take these escalations seriously. And our last story. Nosy old Karen tries to get her neighbor in trouble with the council. My friend Stan has worked at the Evaluation Office of Assessments, VOA, for his local council for the last 35 years. He's got a lot of stories, but this is my favorite. For context, the VOA is responsible for evaluating which council tax band a property should be on. The higher the band, the more council tax you pay. For those outside the UK, council tax is used to fund civic services such as schools, rubbish collection, and emergency services, etc. Which band you get depends on lots of different factors, but generally speaking, the more a property is worth, the higher the band is likely to be. Change to a property that significantly increases its value, such as getting pools or extensions built, can sometimes mean a property has to be reassessed to see if it needs to go up a band. There was a woman, let's call her Mildred, who would regularly call Stan's office to report her neighbors for everything. Mildred was a typical nosy neighbor curtain twitcher who made it her life's mission to know everyone's business. Her hobby was reporting her neighbors to the police, HMRC, UK equivalent of the IRS, immigration, and of course, the VOA. To give you an idea of just how awful this woman was, here are a few stories various neighbors told Stan and his colleagues. One neighbor got reported to HMRC because he came home with a fancy new car, therefore he must be evading tax. It was a 5-year-old Mondeo he'd just bought secondhand. Another neighbor was reported because Mildred didn't think their child looked sick enough to be off school, so she reported them for truancy. The child had recently had an emergency appendectomy and they were at home recovering as per their doctor's orders. Everyone in Stan's department hated this woman. Not only did she add to their already heavy workload, but she was also rude, entitled, and generally unpleasant to talk to. She often exaggerated her reports to ensure somebody would be sent to inspect the property. Worse still, her reports often caused her neighbors to call and shout at Stan and his colleagues, understandably so. But what they hated most of all was that they were obligated to follow up on any reports she made, and she never got in trouble for giving false or exaggerated reports. They knew she was just a mean old lady and they didn't want to enable her behavior, but policy was policy. Well, one day Stan drew the short straw and took a call from the dreaded Mildred. My neighbors at number 61 added a new bedroom to their house, and they got a new kitchen in with an extension. Andy put up a new shed. I bet they haven't reported it, Mildred whined. I demand somebody reevaluate them immediately. If I have to pay my taxes, so do they. Stan begrudgingly sent a letter out to the neighbor at number 61, let's call him Bob, feeling sorry for him. A few days later, Bob called, clearly fed up. Bob explained that he had checked with the office before getting the work done, and he'd been told the work was not significant enough to be reported, so he didn't report it. There was a note on Bob's account confirming this. Throughout the whole conversation, Bob was friendly and nice. He knew Stan had a job to do. When the inspector attended Bob's property, Mildred stared gleefully from behind her curtains. However, the joke was on her because the inspector uncovered that Bob's house had mistakenly been put on the wrong band for over a decade. He should have been on a much lower one. That meant Bob was due a massive rebate for overpaying his council tax for years. Stan laughed his butt off when the report came to his desk. He was delighted to call Bob and give him the good news. Here's the petty part. After the two had a good chuckle about everything, Bob told Stan he'd use some of the money to throw a big FU barbecue garden party. He'd invite all his neighbors, except for Mildred. Bob mentioned he might get some banners made for the party that said FU Mildred, but Stan warned him that could get him in legal trouble, so instead Bob decided the banners would say, "Thanks for the money, Mildred," instead. So Bob threw his big, flashy garden party, complete with banners he got printed, while Mildred seethed from behind her curtains, knowing she was responsible for Bob's sudden windfall. Oh my goodness, Mildred really thought she had everyone wrapped around her nosy little finger, didn't she? Reporting people left, right, and center like some self-appointed neighborhood tax collector, only for it to blow up in her face spectacularly. Bob's epic reversal of fortune is just the kind of karmic justice that warms my heart. Can you imagine Mildred smugly twitching her curtains thinking she's finally going to get Bob, only to find out she gifted him a rebate? Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.